My thoughts on the 2015 NASCAR Hall of Fame inductees. Disclaimer, strictly my opinion. Bill Elliott, 1988 Premier Series champ, known as Winston Cup then, two-time Daytona winner, probably deserves to be in, and the first one to get in under the new age deal, where if they're a certain age, the time for retirement from racing is waived. I frankly thought either Bill Elliott or Terry Labonte would get in this year, and I was right. Terry Labonte did not. Terry Labonte was a two-time champ of the Premier Series, Winston Cup then. Possibly should have been in ahead of Elliott. It's kind of a close call, but Terry Labonte should be in too, but not this year. Maybe a little early for Elliott. I've said this before on Rusty Wallace, DW. Rex White, 1960, I believe it was 1960, Premier Series champion. Probably all Premier Series champions should be in. Won some races, deserves to be in, no problem there. Wendell Scott, the first, I'm going to call, he was not the first African American driver in NASCAR. Ironically, there was a Charlie Scott before him, but as far as they can tell, no relation. But Wendell's in on the legacy of paving the way for guys like Bubba Wallace, and to a lesser extent, and Bubba Wallace is what he wants to be called, not what I'm calling him. Just for a lesser extent, guys like Eric Almirola, some of the PK in the truck, some of the foreign drivers and NASCAR's drive for diversity. But in on what I consider paving the way, literally, for the changing of the guard in NASCAR. If you remember, not too many years ago, if you're old enough to remember, most of the drivers were from the South. Now, you look, there's basically, I think Dale Earnhardt Jr. is the only driver from North or South Carolina running full time. I could be wrong on that. Fred Lorenzen, who was the first driver way back in 1963 to win over $100,000 in a single season. Let me go back. Obviously, Elliott's still living. Rex White is still living. Wendell Scott is not. Fred Lorenzen, who is still living, but may be suffering from some racing-related problems to do with concussions. They didn't know a lot back then. But Fred Lorenzen deserves to be in. He did not. He only ran mostly the big money races and won his share, including the '65 Daytona 500. Now, some people say that win's tainted because in the days of big factory participation in NASCAR, Chrysler packed up, the Dodges and the Plymouths packed up and went home over a dispute with their Hemi engine that came out the year before. But Lorenzen deserves to be in. I hope he's able to understand that. I understand he is not in good health at all. Possibly, and don't quote me on this, from what I've read on Facebook, possibly in a nursing facility. Don't quote me on that. And the last one, two-time Premier Series champion, Joe Weatherly. Sadly, after winning the 62 and 63 Series titles, lost his life early in the season at Riverside, California, back when Riverside used to be the first race of the calendar year, although some races in very late 62 probably counted on the 63 season. Little history lesson there. But Joe Weatherly, in the era before window nets, crashed at Riverside, left side of the car in the wall. Now, would a window net have saved him? Who knows? But definitely two-time champ, won all kinds of races, deserves to be in, no problem there. Driving for Hall of Famer Bud Moore most of the time. The ironic thing about Joe Weatherly, and I don't know how many people know this, but if you have Greg Fielding's 40 Years of Stock Car Racing book, Joe Weatherly literally hitchhiked to the 63 championship. Bud Moore's car was running the major races, but back then they run 50-some races a year. He'd pick up rides here and there, or if you go to UltimateRacingHistory.com, or I can't think of the other website right now. Somebody can post it in the comments, but there's one that will give you the 64 Premier Series on, what is it? So I cannot think of that website. My mind's blank. Oh, www.racing-reference.com. And look at 1963. You will see Joe Weatherly in all kinds of different driving for all kinds of different owners. Bud Moore in the major races, who was just inducted into the Hall of Fame a few years ago, retired car owner. But pretty good class. I kind of think it's early on Elliott. The others I'm fine with. Wendell Scott, there has been a push to get him in, and even a little bit of a push for Rex White. But I've said this before, don't think the Hall of Fame's putting enough people in. You got a sport that's been around since the late 40s, and 5 people a year. We've already experienced Cotton Owens, although living to know he was nominated and going to be inducted, not living to be inducted. It's time some of these older guys that are still living are inducted while they're still living. I'm glad to see Rex White and Fred Lorenzen. Like I say, I hope Lorenzen can understand it. Sadly, he may not be able to, but it's just been my opinion for what it's worth.